Admiral, I'm going to begin with you.
Morning.
Is it possible for Iran to take steps to block the Strait of Hormuz and another critical point? And if so, how soon could they do it and how long could they do it for?
It is possible that they can block both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern end of the Red Sea. The Houthis have a history, recent history over the last several years, periodically putting mines in the water down in the Bab el-Mandeb. And then the Iranians certainly have a capability, not only in the Strait of Hormuz, but throughout the Arabian Gulf. They have thousands of mines. They keep a number of those mines on hand, if you will, down at the waterfront, so that they can put them into the water in a very clandestine way. It's likely that the first indication we have that there are mines in the water are when a ship hits the water. They can do that nearly overnight and lay a minefield out fairly quickly, and it's going to take some time to do the cleanup.
Amrita, coming over to you. I mean, I think the natural question here is what impact could that potentially have on the oil market? We have seen some upside moves, but certainly not a parabolic move based on some of the tensions and not a very sharp upside move, and we've seen pullbacks as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've gone through this period of the market still being concerned about oversupply in Q4, right? Because the demand outlook isn't great. OPEC is adding barrels, and I think that's what is ultimately kind of keeping the market in check. We also think that, for Iran to actually close the straits, that would very much have to be the last resort, right? If they are trying to de-escalate, as we understand they are, through the Omanis, et cetera, dragging international or even regional powers through or into this conflict by closing the straits is really not going to be the solution, right? I mean, obviously we have about 20 million barrels per day of oil transiting through there, about a quarter of global trade, about a fifth of global LNG trade as well. And obviously that's hugely significant. That's why you've seen some risk premium. What's more interesting is in the freight market, you've seen it more so than crude. So the shipping rates have obviously gone up. But again, we still want to reiterate that this will very much be, the very last resort they take if they are serious about de-escalating.
Admiral, I want to come back to you and lean on some of your experience in the region. I think one of the questions that a lot of just regular Americans have is exactly what is going on with Iran. Are they actually trying to build nuclear weapons? And if they are, does Israel alone have the ability to, essentially take them out, or will they require significant U.S. help?
Well, to answer the second question first, I do think the Israelis have the capability of taking out the nuclear weapon facilities in Iran. Otherwise, they wouldn't have undertaken this endeavor all by themselves. So the assumption must be that they're going to be successful, and they think that they can be successful. And I happen to think that they can be. What's going on with Iran in their weapons program? That's the great question, and it's been a great question for almost all of this century. And the Iranians have been way less than forthcoming in terms of what they're doing and what their intentions are. Now, what we do know is that they have enriched a good amount of uranium, enough to build several bombs, well above the 5% needed for peaceful nuclear power or for medicinal research and usage. So the only reason to go above 5%, and they have a lot of uranium enriched at 60%, is if you're going to build a nuclear weapon. And so because Iran hasn't been forthcoming, I think it's safe to assume that they do plan on producing a nuclear weapon. And that would be obviously very destabilizing in the region and throughout the world.
Amrita, I want to come back over to you. So the Admiral is obviously laying out some of the concerns that seem to be, with the administration, is that Iran is trying to enrich that uranium for weapons purposes and just the possible impact that could have. If there is a sustained attack on Iran, either from Israel or from the U.S. and Israel, and those Iranian barrels are taken off the market, what does that do to oil prices? And does that have a significant impact in the short term and long term, or just the short term?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's something the market hasn't really grappled with yet. The focus has been on the here and now, and that, we haven't really seen energy infrastructure being disrupted. We've seen a little bit of an outage or attacks on kind of South Pars 14, like a refinery in Israel being taken down, and a couple of kind of, LPG outages here and there. But the reality is, if we were to lose Iranian barrels, about 1.5 to 1.6 million barrels per day of Iranian oil currently flows into China. So China will have to seek alternatives. OPEC has that spare capacity to give. That's not going to be the issue. But there are questions about whether, Middle Eastern OPEC members necessarily want to get drawn into this conflict, right? Like, do they want to be seen to be increasing production just as Iranian barrels are going down? I think that's a fair question to ask. Of course, ultimately they will serve their customers. India, China will be critical, and as long as they want the barrels, they'll OPEC will meet that. I think longer term is the more interesting question. We've seen this, during the past kind of Iranian revolution. They used to produce 6 million barrels per day. Since that revolution, they never went back above 4 million barrels per day. What are we looking at? Like, what kind of an Iran are we looking at? Are we going to see some significant degradation in their upstream? Do we just basically see oil production kind of gradually decline from the kind of 3.7, 3.8 to say 2.5? Those are the big unknowns. And I think the more interesting question the market has to think about for those medium-term balances is that at the moment, everybody's like, oh, sanctions are going to get lifted and we're going to get more Iranian oil. But I think there is a risk that over time, if what's going on is prolonged and if we don't get something very stable, you could actually get downside risk to Iranian production.